We have video again. Yeah? Are you looking now? No worries. So I think we're live now, and I think that was technical error on my part. I apologize. Do you want me to start over, or do you want me to just kind of recap with some pictures, some video? And can you cut this out, or is this going to be on YouTube forever? Okay. Okay. All righty. Thank you. Bye. You have to love technical issues, don't you? Gotta love them. I'm Cindy Zacheis, and this is starting over. Okay, woodblock printing, the things you heard but you didn't see. Okay, so woodblocks. I mentioned the tiny little woodblock that didn't work. That's this guy, this square spiral that is so very cool. Loved the square spiral. And when I first bought it, as I mentioned, I couldn't get it to work because I'd never used woodblocks before, and I figured it looks like a rubber stamp. I can use this. Not so much. Did not work for me because I had never woodblock printed before, and I didn't realize what the secret sauce was. So today you learn about what the secret sauce is, and you can take all kinds of things that are carved or have interesting shapes, and you can print with them if you don't mind putting paint on them. So this didn't work. I put it away, and I did not revisit woodblock printing again until my friend Judy Gula at Artistic Artifacts said, hey, I've got some woodblocks, come play. What would you have said? I'll be right there. Exactly. So I went over and we played with woodblocks, and I said to her, I can't do this. I'm not smart enough to do this. A friend of mine says, you've got to be 10% smarter than the problem you're trying to solve. And so the sad truth was I wasn't 10% smarter than this. Yeah. Or apparently recording on Facebook. Anyway, so I got there, and we talked about the wood blocks and these wonderful wood blocks that are handmade by artisans in India. The group that is associated with the shop where I teach and where I buy my wood blocks keeps 40 families in business. Our broker goes family to family, artisan to artisan. Do you have work today? And if the answer is no, I don't have work today, then our broker, if he has orders to fill, gives an order to the artisan, and that is how we contribute to the industry, I guess, of wood blocks. So we're proud of that. Anyway, so I have my little leaf wood block, and you'll see in a bit when we talk about what's on the wall behind me. I like leaves a lot. Trees, leaves, nature, it's kind of a thing. And so this particular wood block is so, to me, so graceful. I love the little curve at the top and the leaves, the way that they're formed. And so I use this a lot. So let's talk about what you're going to need when you sit down to do some woodblock printing of your own. Well, because of the name, you know you're going to need a woodblock. Easy enough to find. We'd love it if you found it with us, but easy enough. So you've got your woodblock, and you have something that you're going to print on. In this case, yeah, I just dangled a preposition. It's not like I ever taught English. Okay, I have a piece of white fabric. Any color I use is going to look really nice on that, so white fabric is good. So I have my woodblock, I have fabric to print on, I have paint. So the paint that you use doesn't have to be a particular brand. I like the stuff that I use from Artistic Artifacts because it's their formulation, especially for woodblock printing. But here's why I like it. I want you to watch the paint off of the spoon. Slow, steady, like pudding. That's the consistency you're going to want, and here's why. If you were to use a loose paint, a liquidy kind of paint, it would cover the wood block pretty quickly, but it would also then drip into all of the little nooks and crannies. And when you turn the block over to print, the loose paint may just run out. And so your impression isn't going to be crisp, and it may have some extra little dots that you didn't expect. Now, if you're good with that, if that's a happy accident that you will embrace, excellent. But that's not what I want. If I've gone to the trouble of finding the wood block and the fabric, and I want to do this, then I kind of want it to look like the wood block. So I'm going to use this very pudding-y, that is a real word now apparently, pudding-like paint. And I need a way to get the paint to the wood block. So if you've ever washed a car, you're familiar with these sponges, just cut them up into little chunks and use that to deliver your paint to your wood block. Okay, so I'm going to dab up and down. I'm not going to wipe side to side, because if I do that, you see all those crannies? I'm going to be wiping paint right into them. And we just talked about the loose paint, the liquidy paint that might go down into those crannies. I want to avoid that. I want them to stay nice and open so that when I print, that's an open space on the fabric. And so, up and down, up and down. There we go. And when you're doing this for the first time with a wood block, not the first time ever, but the first time in this particular session, then what might happen is the paint may not have really great coverage on the wood block. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just push it down, give it a little bit of weight. I often stand up for this, get a little heft behind it. And then instead of picking it straight up, which a lot of people want to do, but if you do that, you get a suction sort of action going on and the fabric comes with you. And then when you take it off, it smears a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of grab it and pull on an angle up like that. And then it works out. So this is what I come up with. Are you looking at it and going, that's not perfect? You're right, it's not perfect. It's hand done. If I wanted perfect, I could maybe screen print, or maybe I just go buy something. But it's not perfect. You can make it better. You see over there where there's a little bit of space where it's not covered? Yeah, exactly. So what you're going to do there is next time, just kind of be careful and look really carefully to make sure that the entire surface of your wood block, once you put paint on it, is a little shiny, and that is your indication that it's wet. Now, if I were to wait, if I were to go ahead and put paint here and then stop and talk to somebody and then maybe put a little more paint on the top and then grab a drink of water, you wouldn't in real life, but you never know. Kid may come in and they're having trouble and you have to go and fix it, and then you come back and do you waste the paint? So you look to see, is it all shiny? On a bigger block, and we're going to see some bigger blocks, on a bigger block, maybe by the time you get to this end is not, is not wet anymore. So what I'm going to do is give it a huff like you rubber stampers do very often, and that's not an indictment. I'm a rubber stamper too. And I'm going to give it a quick little, probably too much pressure there in the exuberance of printing, and pick it up. Yeah. So, too dark right at the tip. Yep, that's right. Even the pros don't get it right all the time. Okay, so this is the key. This is the key. You've been watching the key, but I didn't tell you what the secret sauce is. You ready for secret sauce? Here you go. This really ugly little orange pad, which comes in a whole bunch of different colors, and the color doesn't matter, except I like orange, so there we are, is the secret sauce. When I first tried to use this lovely square spiral that I thought was the coolest thing since sliced bread, and I could not get it to work, I figured it was me, and it was, because I didn't know this is the secret. Think about a rubber stamp. Usually you have a handle, sometimes it's wood, sometimes it's lucite, but you've usually got a handle. And then there's this rubber that's carved, or I don't know, formed in some way on the bottom, and that's the impression that you get. And then the layer in the middle is squishy. It's like a gasket almost. That's how this works. that allows you to have firm, even pressure over the entire thing. Without the gasket, excuse me, without the gasket, you're not going to be able to have an even coverage with this part, the business end of the woodblock and your fabric. So this is the secret sauce. It doesn't cost very much. There are toys, yoga mats, not good yoga mats, but you know, the little the mats you get to cover like a floor of some kind. You can always find something in a store that might work. I'm going to recommend that you go somewhere and find something that is designed especially for this. And here's why. Because how thick it is and how much pressure it takes to push it down, to compress it, is kind of specific. And the people who sell mats made specifically for this purpose have found the foam that is has exactly the right amount of resistance. And so that's what I would do. That's what I would find. That was the secret sauce. And so if you have a woodblock, some paint that pours like pudding, some fabric to print on, a sponge to move the paint to the woodblock, and this little magic thing, then you're good to go. And you will have really great impressions. Maybe not great first impressions, but great impressions. So that's the whole technique. And so going from this, and really we don't need an hour of me just making more little leaves, we really don't. Going from this, we can think about how to apply the things we already know from the art that we make. Any classes that we've had, any things that have worked in our studios, and we've stood back and we said, why did I like that? I like the color, I like the movement, I like the line, I like the scale, I like how close things are, I like how far apart things are. You think about the things that work for you in your art, and then apply that to how you stamp or how you print. I use those words interchangeably. And so, so let's talk about things you can do to change the effect that you get with the wood block print. Okay, so exciting, black on white. Now I like black and white. Half my wardrobe is black and white, and the other half is white and black. So not very exciting. So we can do things to make what we're doing way more exciting. You know what occurs to me? I should tell you about cleaning up first. I'm sorry. Squirrel. I had a squirrel moment. To clean up your block. Okay. When this is carved, oh, and if you want to see a video of people actually carving these wood blocks, go to artistic.artifacts.com, and on their site they have a link to the folks who do the ones that we sell. And so you can, I say we like it's my shop, it really isn't. My best friend's shop, and I teach there. But you can see the link to, excuse me. Is there anything better than water? That was exciting. Okay. So, when they're finished carving, they soak the wood blocks in olive oil. What that does is it fills the pores of the wood with something that will resist water. Because if you've ever had anything that's wood that either dries out in the winter or really swells, like a door in the summer, you know that wood often takes in and then loses moisture. If that happens to your wood blocks, they would crack. And if they crack, they could be really interesting, but they wouldn't look the way that you wanted them to look when you bought them. And so they infuse them with this olive oil. What that does for you is a couple of things. One, when you buy it, you have to be sure not to put it near paper, in a paper bag. I mean, if you're just taking it home and it's alone in a paper bag, that's okay. But you don't want to run the risk of it, I'm trying to think what the verb would be. Not leaking, oozing, no, not like that. But leaving an oily sort of impression on paper. So we don't want that. So that's one thing that it does for you. The other thing that it does for you is that you've got paint on your woodblock, and you need to get the paint off of your woodblock. I've had some students, yay, I've had some students who don't really want to bother cleaning them. They want the fun of using them, but they don't want to get those scrub brushes out and clean them. And so here's why you really should. Not just because I'd like you to, but because the more paint that dries on the surface of your woodblock, the bigger each of the elements in the design get, and you lose the fine detail. And so if you want the woodblock to look the way when you use it that it did when you bought it, then you need to do a little maintenance and get rid of the paint. How do you do it? I have a pan, a jelly roll pan, so it has tiny little, edges. And I put maybe 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch of water in there. Don't worry about the soap. Doesn't matter what temperature it is. And I know I just said don't soak it in water, but yeah, you're going to just put it in water for maybe a minute, maybe. While you're working on one woodblock, the next one that you're going to clean is soaking. And when you take it out of that, this is very high tech. Here's how I clean my woodblocks. Old toothbrushes or a nail brush. And I just go into it when it's all wet and soapy, and I go at it like that. Now, sometimes a woodblock that has been used makes it to the bottom of the box, and I don't see it for a year. And then I realize, oh my gosh, it is covered with paint. I will occasionally soak it for just a little bit longer and then use something that has a point, like a dental tool, when I could use something like that and get into the little crevices carefully, especially if it's been in water, because then the wood is a little softer. But you do want to clean it. So a brush, and clean it the same day or the next day. Don't wait any longer than that. And then everything will be great. And you can use it again later as if it were new. Cool. Okay, so we know how they're made. We know where they're made. We know how to clean them. We know how to use them. We know what the secret sauce is. What can you do with them? Okay, so I have a couple of examples set up here. Here is, okay, another technical challenge. Let me, okay. Here are 3 Fleur-De-Lis. They're kind of cool. They're not the best print job in the world because, again, when you start with a woodblock, and I don't think I did very much printing on that day, you don't always get the best coverage, but they're kind of cool. It's a light yellow fabric, and so I've got blue and yellow going. We like blue and yellow. It's a classic combination, and if you're going with provincial, problem solved and all of that, we're good to go. So yeah, but it's not very exciting. It's not very exciting because everything's so very plain. And we've got 2 colors, and 2 colors can be a really strong way to go with a color, palette. But it also can be kind of dull and boring. So what could we do to make this more interesting? Well, think about your work. I don't know what you do, but would you add stuff? Would your background be more complicated? Would you think differently about how you put those Fleur-De-Lis together? Would you put them in different places? And it might be helpful to you to see the stamp and the image. Okay, so when you go into a shop and you see something that looks like this, the image that you get from it is very similar to what you see, sort of a WYSIWYG in a very low-tech way. So, yeah. Okay, so not incredibly exciting, but when you're just trying out a woodblock when you first get it, you want to see what it's going to look like. And so I have here for your viewing pleasure a dog's breakfast. This is what you get when you have some sort of a printed fabric. You've got some paint that you have never used before, so you want to see what colors are going to show up and what they're going to look like. And you've got some wood blocks that you just want to play with. This is the kind of fabric, or the kind of piece of fabric, that you would use to test an impression, to see how it's going to look before you go to your actual project. I know some artists who tell me that that piece of fabric, the one that they wipe their brushes on when they're trying to get the extra gloop off of them, those pieces of fabric often make the most interesting components in some of their work. And so I'm not seeing anything in here that really makes me very happy or very interested, but I'll continue to use it and put other, you know, impressions on it. Maybe someday I'll throw in a dye pot and it'll be interesting. Today, we just feel sorry for it. Okay. So it's not up to a background to make things interesting. It takes more than that. So perhaps when you are trying out some new woodblocks, maybe it would be a good idea. There's no up and down, but I'm just looking at the visual weight and it makes me happier to have it oriented this way. You give your woodblock a better shot at telling you how beautiful it is. If you keep to one color, you limit the variables. It's like a science experiment. Limit your variables, control your variables. So this is maybe 3 different woodblocks up here in the corner. This is one woodblock but rotated so that that diagonal meets in the middle. How cool is that? And the flowers. It's not a very big woodblock, but you could create an entire garden with different colors, different shades of the same color. You could do all kinds of just amazing things with the one woodblock. Rotate it, shift the colors. Kind of cool. Me, I'm a grid girl. I love grids. And so I love that thing at the bottom with the different kinds of circles that almost look like parasols when you're looking down at them. Parasols, excuse me. I like that a lot. And I think from a quilting standpoint, how I might stitch around them. From a surface design standpoint, how I might go for some Zucchini Go inks, or maybe I would go for, I don't know, Shivo oil paint sticks, and I would go in after the paint is dry, and I would do something, because those little round circles that are empty, oh, they beckon me. I have to do something. If you're into the stitch movement, the hand stitch that everybody's doing, the meditations, stitch meditations, this would be a great way to create the canvas that you're going to then stitch on, because you'd have structure, you'd have places to do your stitching, and you'd have some inspiration about what's going on here. So that's kind of cool. Okay, so that makes things a little more interesting. We like that. So let's talk about something that didn't work. I like to call this, what's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with this picture? I know you can't talk to me, but I know you're talking to your computer, your device. What's wrong with this picture is twofold. One, here, paint coverage, not enough. Here, paint coverage too much. Let's see how that works. And I really thought I had that woodblock out. Okay, here's a smaller version of that woodblock, tiny little version. So what happened here is here where that wood is, that is a lower level, and that wood is not part of the impression, shouldn't be part of the impression, but it's part of the structure of the woodblock. It allows that stem to be stable. So if you are too exuberant with your paint and you're patting, and not paying attention to where the paint's going, if you get paint down here or anywhere on an unexpected place, here is a leaf woodblock that I love, and I'm going to show you an impression of this. And here is the same kind of area where if you get paint on that, there's a good chance that paint is going to transfer onto your fabric and you're not going to be happy about it. Okay, so that's what's wrong with that picture, which makes what's wrong with this picture really easy. Yeah, why am I even asking you? Is there a way you could turn that into a happy accident? Think about your art. What do you do when things go wrong? Sure, you could say, well, I meant to do that. You could be like the cat that falls off the counter. Yeah, I meant to do that. Yeah. You could embrace it and say it is a reflection. Well, if it is a reflection, then maybe you could bolster the shiny part of it, maybe with a little iridescent paint. And you could maybe darken what's around it to really make it look round, make it look dimensional. That could be kind of fun. So, and then we still have that little thing here and here, those little paints, those little things that were on the woodblock that didn't get cleaned off before the impressions were made. Okay. So we were talking about white. If I've got black paint and I'm stamping on white, boy, isn't that exciting. But if I stamp on a different color, let me see if I can turn the light down just a little bit. Probably not. There we go. So it won't be quite as blown out. So, oh, yeah, there we go. So great color. And that is infinitely more interesting than the white, I think. So think about what you're going to stamp on. Plain colors are really cool, especially if they're colors that, you know, make your heart sing. You guys ever make garments, or any of you garment sewers? When I started sewing at 8, girl children in my family learned to sew, I made garments. And I remember when that happened, my mother had a pattern she wanted me to use, and she had the ugliest fabric in the world to use. Do you think I was excited about learning to sew? Not even a little. Because I knew that if I didn't like the fabric, no matter how well I did, I was still going to hate the finished product. And so when you're learning a technique, and this is how it transfers, there's a reason for that odd squirrel story. What I would do, perhaps, is use fabrics that you love. Maybe not the fabrics that were super expensive that you had shipped from another place. I went shopping. I'm from Virginia, not originally, but I'm in Virginia. And I went to San Francisco to sewing camp with Sandra Bitsina. And we went shopping there. My sister and I were there. We shopped for fabric and had it shipped back. That's not the fabric I would play with unless I had a project in mind. But I might buy an extra quarter yard, half a yard of something that I really liked and set it aside for this kind of experimentation. Because if you print it and you love it, then it's got a future. If you print on an ugly piece of fabric, there's no future. You're not going to love it. Ugly fabric is ugly fabric, unless you stick it in a dye pot. Okay, so the light blue is cool. And then for me, and we all have different taste, but for me, the darker purple really made it exciting. There's less of a contrast. We talk value. Remember we talking value? There's a less of a contrast here. The darks are all kind of dark, and the purple's a little lighter. Here, it's a light fabric, medium fabric, and a dark paint. Interesting, but doesn't really do anything for me. Let's go snowflake. Lavender, interesting. Pink, more interesting. Red, and metallic silver paint, more interesting. Okay. And then the one that just makes me so happy, I've got to do something about this. Yeah. So if you're a color wheel kind of person, think about purple and orange. Looking at each other across, yep. So what can you do with that? High contrast. If you want it to be calm and lovely, we can talk about analogous color schemes right next to each other, or maybe only value differences, but the same color. You're going to see that in a bit. Okay, or you could get really crazy busy. Okay, we were looking at this leaf. These are not good impressions, but you can see them. Okay, so you can sort of see them. Okay, patience. That's as low as it'll go, so we're just going to lose it entirely. Okay, so there we go. So you've got the leaf. There we go. I won't move it now. You've got the leaf, and you've got the leaf. The leaf is on white fabric. How exciting is that? Now, I don't normally think of stripes and leaves together, but here's a leaf on a pink and white striped fabric. Very light value. I might like this with a darker paint color so you could see it better, but I suspect that this is a ghost image, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Okay, so interesting. So in composition, have you learned about or talked about or thought about, or do you use things like rhythm, repetition, proximity? Here, and we are back to this block. I know, right? What is it about that color green? Everybody smiles, I think, when they see that green. I do. But look at the proximity. We've got rhythm, because you know exactly where the next block is going to go. It's going to go right there. We've got rhythm. We've got proximity. They're not so far apart that they don't look connected. And sometimes if your impressions are far enough apart, they don't go with each other. So why do you have them? So there we go. Proximity, something you already know from what you do. What happens if you make an impression? You make an impression and you've still got paint on your block. Okay, so impression 1, impression 2, impression 3, without any additional paint. So that gives you ghost images. And if you do that, you get to experience the same, how do I say this? You get different effects with the same block. And don't we just love that? So there are ghost images, and I've got a mess of ghost images for you. Then I have a challenge for you if you decide to try this, and then we're going to look at finished products and call it a day. Cool? Okay. So here is a woodblock desperately in need of cleaning because everybody in my classes seem to love this woodblock. This woodblock is used as a tree. I've seen it used, and I think it was the last time it was used because of the color I recognize, as coral in an underwater scene. Somebody used it as roots for like a tree, which I thought was kind of interesting too. Or it could be a shrub, who knows. Anyway, this and a tree. So if I hold the tree, you can see that there are 3 tree impressions. The one in the middle was the first one, the one on this side is the second one, and then you can barely see, but there it is over there, light, beautiful ghost image of the tree. When I look at this, I think mists. I think trees on a ridge maybe, or a soft rolling hill, and the fog's coming in, or it's first thing in the morning, and it's just kind of, heating up and burning off. So the blue fabric was interesting. You can go with unexpected fabrics. This you can't really see is very much like pink and white gingham. So you could do that too. Any fabric you've got is worth a shot. Here's some men's shirting. I mean, obviously because of the stripes, you know that that's what that is. And not very well laid out, but if you were a little more intentional about this, could you make a really big tree out of one woodblock by kind of building it out like branches? So the woodblocks are not terribly cheap, but they are really useful once you stop and think about what you can do with them. This little guy here, what a great border that would make. And if you're a traditional quilter, actually, and you have solid borders around the outside of your quilt, why not consider embellishing it with some woodblocks and then going back and quilting around them? And one of the classes I teach, quilting, what is it? Mark the line, mark the design and follow the line. That's what it is. It's a craftsy class. And if I did that, I would have a pattern already marked on my fabric. I wouldn't have to mark anything else. I wouldn't have to do anything but follow the lines on your fabric. So, or you could do a whole cloth quilt just with wood blocks. It's worth a shot. Okay, challenge, and then let's look at some finished work. We talked a little bit about rubber stamps and rubber stampers. And so if you're a rubber stamper, then you have a wealth of information and techniques from what you've done with rubber stamps and paper, which squirrel takes me to, can I use wood blocks with paper? Sure. I don't think it's as successful, and I believe that there's a tool that's best for each thing that we want to accomplish. We get a picture in our head and we want to make that picture, and if that's the case, we go to our toolbox and we think, what do we know how to do? We've all heard the joke about if you're a surgeon, everything looks like something you should fix with surgery. Or if you're a carpenter, you carry a hammer because that's how you're going to fix everything. So if you have a big toolbox with lots of artistic tools in it, like woodblock printing as one of the things that you can do, that's cool, and you can then take your rubber stamping things. Okay, so remember the concept of masking? And I'm not talking masking tape, I'm just talking masking. So here, this person did two things. I did not print this. I liked this in one of my classes and the student handed it to me and she said, I don't like brown, I'm not ever going to use it. I do, and so I am. She did two things. Down here at the bottom, she put two different colors of paint on the woodblock. Dark paint and orange, okay? And so what you can do is the same thing with your own woodblocks. You could take a tree and you could do the brown, trunk, and you could do different greens, or you could do it all one color and then go back with a brush or with sponge or with, so many possibilities. But in this case, you can put more than one color on a woodblock and then print. Here, she put two pieces of fabric together, did a single impression covering both fabrics, and then she gets a twofer. She gets halves, again, border, and she has it on both fabrics. I just thought that was brilliant. Very, very cool. And another student who loves me, same woodblock, and I don't have this, so I can't show you what it looks like. I don't have the block, but she just kind of did it, all over and folded these together, and then when you pull them apart, so let's say you had, I'm going back to quilts because that's kind of where I'm coming from. Let's say you've got a quilt and you've got blank squares. You got blank squares? Then woodblock in them, or woodblock in parts of them. So, easy stuff that you can do. Okay, let's look at actual finished products, and then I will let you go about the rest of your day. So, technical, there we go. Okay, so, woodblocks. There are a mess of them out there on the market, and every time I go into a store that sells them, I see some that I've never seen before and have to have. The ones you see back here, they're so clean and white. I have never used them. I will. Someday, I will. So let's start with the piece here that screams. This, because of the color, screams. It's cherry wood fabric. Cherry wood fabric has a visual texture to it that's not a physical texture. So if you're going to use a solid fabric, cherry wood's kind of cool for that purpose. And so I used cherry wood fabric for this, and I went ahead and stamped. I did this for Quilting Arts TV, and I didn't start very early before I had to be there with samples in hand. And so I didn't spend a lot of time on the border, although the border is really kind of the star here, don't you think, with all those lovely colors vying for attention. But what I did do was think about how I want to lay this out, and then I stamped this pattern on a mess of different fabric. Okay, so I found something round to put here so that I could line up, the stamps around it and have an equal little center. I don't remember what it was. I think it might be the cone of a thread. And then the same, but smaller. I've got this woodblock in like 4 different sizes. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's a bit of an obsession. But that's the repetition, and that's the rhythm. We know where to expect. And if there were a smaller block still, we might expect them to be here like feathers. Who knows? Or maybe I could have quilted them in with a higher contrast thread. So something that you can do. Very high contrast between this paint, which is actually a very dark eggplant, although it really does read black, I think, on top of green. Okay, does this look familiar? Yeah, same layout. The difference here is this is shot cotton. So the thread, the warp thread on the when they did this is one color is blue, and the weft threads, which, forgive me any weavers, I remember this because it goes weft in white. Anyway, the weft fabric or thread was a completely different color, in this case sort of a gold yellow. So it really gives you sort of an iridescent kind of thing. Stamp on fabric that you love, because then you're likely to do something with it when you're done. So I used a metallic copper, and I have back here some, not metallic really, but kind of an iridescent copper. I think it's a Burmese silk, maybe, Thai silk, some kind of silk. Anyway, and those two are eventually going to live together in a pillow. I know that. This, very low contrast. You're probably looking at it going, why is it up there? It's up there because it is green on green. The background is a print. I know, I know. No picture, it doesn't count. Okay, so the background fabric is a print, and it's been quilted with some curvy lines, so the print is not very evident, but it's there, so it adds just another layer of complexity. Anyway, it's very calm, it's very peaceful. I've had folks who look at it and go, why'd you bother? You don't really get much for your, for the time you spent doing this, but I see this fabric, this motif, this maybe as a pillow on, let's say, a front porch filled with white wicker furniture. That's kind of how I see it. Across the top, which you still can't really see, the joy for me in that quilt is the predictability of the colors. We know what colors come in next. We know that because we know what order they are on in the color wheel. And so this is so predictable. These are not. And the simplicity of using one motif and repeating it. Again, rhythm, repetition, makes it a strong piece, I think. I love that piece. Okay, let's just do two weird things and then we'll be done. Cool? Let's go back to the Fleur-De-Lis. The Fleur-De-Lis here, how do I say this? I used black paint, but what I did was I cut out small pieces of batik fabric, put them down in a grid with black between them, and then printed with black paint right on top so that it looks like there's part missing. I think that's kind of, a cool thing. I like that part. So very simple. The layout of the Fleur-De-Lis, I could have done it in a lot of different ways. I could have made them little brother and sister right next to each other holding their little, could have done anything. But I liked this because it's the unexpected for me. So that was kind of cool. The second woodblock I ever bought. Why, right? Why would you buy that? In fact, I don't even, yeah, it's wood. I see the grain. Why would you get it? Well, it's interesting because it's a texture. And as artists, we use texture all the time. Sometimes physical texture, sometimes visual texture. And I knew that this would give me visual texture when I'm using other motifs. This would either be on top of, or it could be a base layer kind of, and then something else on top of that. And so what I did was the same little squares of batiks, this time put on purple for a pop of the unexpected, and then stamped with this oddball little woodblock that didn't look like much, but boy, I kind of like what it did. Now, if I wanted to go and stitch, if I wanted to do hand stitching on this would be a really nice palette to do that. It'd be very cool. And then, of course, black in the background because I like a dark frame, a dark border, because it tells your eye, hey, you're at the edge, you're done now, go back in where the action is and look at the pretty stuff. Okay, so woodblock printing, paint that's like pudding, the secret sauce cushion, and woodblocks and fabric that make your heart sing. A little bit of time, and if you have questions or comments, Cindy at CYNDI at moonlightingquilts.com. Woodblocks themselves are available at Artistic Artifacts, artisticartifacts.com. They ship, they're happy to ship, or once we're all out and about, come on down. They're in Alexandria, Virginia, and maybe I'll see you there. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. We'll talk later.